In spite of Superintendent King's anxiety, Lentz refused to be hurried in. And consequently, when he did present himself at King's office and announced that he was ready to report, King was pleasantly surprised as well as relieved. "Well, I'm delighted. Sit down, Doctor, sit down. Have a cigar. What do we do about it?" But Lentz stuck to his perennial cigarette and refused to be hurried. "I must have some important information first. How important? How important is the power of your plan? I mean, if you're thinking about shutting down the bomb for more than a limited period, it can't be done. Why not? The figures supplied to me are correct. Your output is less than 13% of the total power used in the country." "Yeah, that's true. We haven't considered the items that go into making up the total. A lot of it's domestic power, which householders get from sunscreens located on their roofs. Another big slice is power from moving roadways. And the portion we provide here is the main power source for most of the heavy industries: steel, plastics, lithics, all kinds of manufacturing and processing. You might as well cut the heart out of a man. But the food industry isn't basically dependent on you. No. Food isn't basically a power industry, although we do supply a certain percentage of the power used in processing. I see your point. And I'll go on to concede that transportation, that is to say, distribution of food, could get along without us. Good. But good heavens, Doctor, you can't stop atomic power without causing the biggest panic this country has ever seen. It's the keystone of our whole industrial system. This country has lived through panics before, and we got past the oil shortage safely. Yeah, because atomic power came along to take the place of oil. You don't realize what this would mean, Doctor. It would be worse than a war. In a system like ours, one thing depends on another. If you cut off the heavy industries all at once, everything else stops too. Nevertheless, you had better dump that bomb." The uranium in the bomb was molten, its temperature being greater than 2400 degrees centigrade. The bomb could be dumped into a group of small containers. The mass in any one container was too small to maintain the progressive atomic disintegration. King glanced involuntarily at the glass-enclosed relay mounted on his office wall. But I could do that, or rather, if I did, the plant wouldn't stay shut down. The director would simply replace me with someone who would operate the bomb. I mean, you're right, of course. But Superintendent, will you order a car to fly me to Chicago? You're going, Doctor? Yes. He took the cigarette holder from his face, and for once the smile of an Olympian detachment was gone completely. His entire manner was sober, even tragic. Short of shutting down the bomb, there is no solution to your problem, none whatsoever. And I owe you a full explanation. You're confronted here with recurring instances of situation psychoneurosis. Roughly, the symptoms manifest themselves as anxiety neurosis or some form of hysteria. Some might be cured with shock techniques, but it would hardly be a kindness. That other young fella, Harper, who blow up the immediate cause of sending for me. He's an anxiety case. When the cause of the anxiety was eliminated from his matrix, he had once regained full sanity, but keeps close watch on his friend. However, it's the cause and prevention of situational psychoneurosis we are concerned with here, rather than the forms which it's manifested. In plain language, psychoneurosis situational simply refers to the common fact first. If you put a man in a situation that worries him more than he can stand, in time, he blows up, one way or another. And that's precisely the situation here. You take sensitive, intelligent young men, impress them with the fact that a single slip on their part, or even some fortuitous circumstance beyond their control, will result in the death of God knows how many people. Then you expect them to remain sane. It's ridiculous. Frankly, it's impossible. But Good heavens, Doctor, there must be some answer. No, let me explain. You don't dare entrust the bomb to less sensitive, less socially conscious men. You might as well turn the controls over to a mindless idiot. With psychoneurosis situational, there are but two cures. The first obtains when the psychos results in the misevaluation of the environment. The cure calls for semantic readjustment. One assists the patient to reevaluate correctly his environment. The worry disappears because there never was a reason to worry in the situation itself, but simply the wrong meaning the patient's mind has assigned to it. The second cause is when the patient has correctly evaluated the situation and rightly finds in its cause for extreme worry. His worry is perfectly sane, perfectly proper, but he cannot stand up under its indefinitely big, you see? And the only possible cure is to change the situation. I've stayed here long enough to assure myself that such is the condition here. Your engineers have correctly evaluated the public danger of this bomb, and it will, with dreadful certainty, drive all of you insane. And the only possible solution is to dump the bomb and leave it dumped. King had continued his nervous pacing on the floor. Now he stopped. Well, isn't there anything I can do? Nothing to cure. Situational psychosis results from adrenaline exhaustion. When a man is placed under a nervous strain, his adrenal gland increases their secretion to help compensate for the strain. If the strain is too great and lasts too long, the adrenals aren't equal to the task and it cracks. That's what you have here. Adrenaline therapy might stay off a mental breakdown, but most assuredly would hasten physical breakdown. But that would be safer from a viewpoint of public welfare, wouldn't it? Even though it assumes that psychiatrists are expendable. Another thing occurs to me. If you selected any new watch engineers from the membership... What? I don't follow. Well, the patient unloads most of his worry on his confessor. He's not himself actually confronted by the situation and can't stand it, is what I'm saying. It is simply an ameliorate. I'm convinced that in this situation, eventually insanity is inevitable. There's a lot of good sense in the confessional. Feels a basic human need. I think that's why the early psychoanalysis were so surprisingly successful for all their limited knowledge. Have you anything more to suggest, Doctor? No. You had better turn your psychological staff loose on means of evaluation. They're able men, all of them. And King pressed a switch and spoke briefly to Steinke. Turning back to Lentz, he said, "You'll wait here while your car is ready, won't you?" Lentz judged correctly that King desired it and agreed. And presently, the tube delivered on King's desk was ping. The superintendent removed a small white pasteboard, a calling card. He studied it with surprise and passed it over to Lentz. "I can't imagine why he should be calling on me. Would you like to meet him?" Lentz read. It read, "Thomas P. Harrington, Captain, Mathematics, United States Navy Director." "I do know him. I'd be very pleased to see him." Harrington was a man with something on his mind. He seemed relieved when Steinke was finished ushering him in, and returned to the outer office. He commenced to speak at once, turning to Lentz, who was nearer to him than King. "You're King? Why, Dr. Lentz, what are you doing here?" "I'm just visiting. This Superintendent King over here. Superintendent King, Captain Harrison." "How do you do, Captain? It's a pleasure to have you here." "Well, it's an honor to be here, sir." "Sit down." "Thanks." He accepted a chair and laid a briefcase on the corner of King's desk. "Superintendent, you're entitled to an explanation as to why I have broken in on you like this." "Hey, I'm glad to have you." "That's kind of you, but... that secretary chap, the one that brought me in here, would it be too much to ask you to tell him to forget my name? I know this all seems strange." "Not at all." King was mystified, though, but willing to grant any reasonable request of a distinguished colleague. He summoned Steinke to the inner office via visiphone and gave him his orders. Lentz stood up and indicated he was about to leave. He caught Harrington's eye. "Think you have a private palaver, Captain?" King looked from Harrington to Lentz and back to Harrington. The astronomer showed momentary indecision, then protested. "I have no objection at all myself. It's up to Dr. King, as a matter of fact. It might well be a very good thing if you did sit in on it." "I don't know what it is, Captain. I don't know what it is that you want to see. But Dr. Lentz is already here in a confidential capacity." "Good. Then it's settled. I'll get right down to business, Dr. King. You know Destry's mechanics of infinitesimals?" "I've heard of it." "Yes, good. Do you remember Theorem 6 and the transformation between equations 13 and 14? I think so, but I'd have to see them, you know." And King got up and went over to the bookcase, and Harrington stayed at him. "Don't bother, I have them here." He hauled out a key, unlocked his briefcase, and drew out a large, much-thumbed, loose-leaf notebook. "Here. You too, Dr. Lentz. Are you familiar with this development?" "I've had occasion to look into them." "Good. I think it's agreed that the next step between 13 and 14 is the key to the whole matter. Now, the change from 13 to 14 looks perfectly valid, would be in some fields. But suppose we expand it to show every possible phase of the matter, every link in the chain of reasoning." He turned the page, showed them the same two equations broken down into 9 intermediate equations. He placed a finger under an associated group of mathematical symbols. "You see that? You see what that implies?" He peered anxiously at their faces. King studied his lips moving. "Yes, I believe I do see. It's odd, I never looked at it just that way before, yet I've studied those equations until I've dreamed about them. Do you agree with it, Doctor?" "I believe so, yes." "I think I have to say yes." "I had hoped you'd tell me I was wrong. But I'm afraid there's no further doubt about its creators of the bomb included an assumption valid in molar physics, but for which we have absolutely no assurances in atomic physics. And I suppose you realize what this means, don't you, Dr. King?" Yes, it means that if that bomb out there ever blows up, we must assume that it will go up all at once, rather than the way Destry predicted. In other words, God help the human race. Captain Harrington cleared his throat to break the silence and followed. "Superintendent, I would not have ventured to call had it been simply a matter of disagreement as to interpretation." "You have something more to go on?" "Yes and no. Probably you gentlemen think of Naval Observatory as being exclusively preoccupied with amphetamines and tide tables. In a way, you would be right, but we still have some time to devote to research, as long as it doesn't cut into the appropriation. My special interest has always been lunar theory. I don't believe in any lunar ballistics. I mean the much more interesting problem of its origin, its history, the problem of a younger Darwin struggled with, as well as my illustrious predecessor, Captain T.J.J.C. I think that it is obvious that any theory of lunar origin in history must take into account the surface features of the moon, especially the mountains, the craters, the marks on its face. Wait just a minute. Captain, I may be stupid, or perhaps I missed something. Is there a connection between what you're discussing and what we discussed before this? Do you have some strange lunar theory? Bear with me a few moments, Dr. King. There is a connection, at least. I'm afraid there's a connection. But I would rather present my points in their proper order before making my conclusions. Harrington drew out his briefcase. A large photograph of the moon. Beautiful full moon. Portrait. I want you to imagine the moon as she'd never been sometime in the past. Dark areas we call seas, actual oceans. It has an atmosphere, perhaps heavier than gas. Oxygen and nitrogen, active gases. For this is an inhabitable planet, inhabited by intelligent beings, beings capable of discovering atomic power and exploiting it. He pointed at the photograph. Near the southern limbs, the long white cycle of Tycho with its shining, incredible 1,000-mile-long rays spreading, thrusting, jutting out from it. Here, at Tycho, was located their main power plant. He moved his finger to a point near the equator, and somewhat east of a meridian, the point where three great dark areas merged: Mare Nubius, Mare Ibrium, Oceanus Polarum, and picked out two bright splotches surrounding also by rays, but shorter, less distinct and wavy. And here, at Copernicus and Kelper, on islands in the middle of the great ocean, with secondary power stations. Perhaps they knew the danger they ran, but wanted power so badly that they were willing to gamble their life for their race. Perhaps they were ignorant of the ruinous possibilities of these little machines. Perhaps their mathematicians assured them that it could never happen. But we will never know. No one can ever know. It blew up. It killed them. I say it killed their planet. It whisked off the grassy envelope and blew into outer space. It blasted great chunks of the planet's crust. Perhaps some of that escaped completely too. But all that did not reach the speed of escape and fell back down in time, splashed great ring-shaped craters in the land. The oceans cushioned the shock. Only the more massive fragments formed craters through the water. Perhaps some life still remained on those ocean depths. And if so, it was doomed to die for the water. Unprotected by atmospheric pressure, it could not remain liquid. It must inevitably escape in time to outer space. Its lifeblood drained away. The planet was dead. Dead by suicide. He met the grave eyes of the two silent listeners with an expression of almost an appeal. Gentlemen, this is only a theory. I realize only a theory, a dream, a nightmare. It has kept me awake so many nights. It has come to tell you about it. See, if you saw it the same way I do. As for the mechanics of it all, it's all there in my notes. You can check it, pray that you find some error, but it's the only lunar theory I have explained, which included all known data accounted for. It accounts for all of them. Suppose, Captain. Suppose we check your mathematics and find no flaw, what then? Well, that's what I came here to find out. And although Lentz had asked the question, Harrington directed the appeal to King, and the superintendent looked up. His eyes met the astronomer's, wavered, and dropped again. There's nothing to be done. There's nothing to be done at all. But good God, man, don't you see it? That bomb has got to be disassembled at once. Take it easy, Captain. Don't be too harsh on poor King. This worries him even more than it does you. What he means is this. We're not faced with a problem in physics, but with a political and economic situation. Let's put it this way. King can no more dump the bomb than a peasant with a vineyard on the slopes of Mount Vesuvius can abandon his holdings and pauperize his family simply because there will be an eruption someday. King doesn't own the bomb out there. He's a custodian. If he dumps it against the wishes of the legal owners, they'll simply oust him, put him somewhere amenable to him. Now, we have to convince the owners. The president could do it. I could get to the president. No doubt you could, through the Navy Department. You might even convince him. Could he even help much? Why, of course he could. He's the president. Wait a minute. You're director of the Naval Observatory. Suppose you took a sledgehammer and tried to smash the big telescope. How far would you get? Not very far. We guard the big fellow pretty closely. Nor can the president act in an arbitrary manner. He's not an unlimited monarch. If he shuts down the plant without due process of law, the federal courts will tie him in knots. I admit that Congress isn't helpless. Would you like to try to give a congressional committee a course on the mechanics of infinitesimals? Harrington readily stipulated the point. But there is no other way. Congress is responsive to public opinion. What we need to do is convince the public that the bomb is a menace to everybody. That could be done without ever trying to explain things, in terms of higher mechanics, that is. Yeah. Certainly it could. You could go on the air with it and scare everybody half to death. You create the darndest panic this slightly slug-nutty country has ever seen. No thank you. I, for one, would rather have us all take the chance of being quietly killed than bring on a mass psychosis. It could destroy the culture we're building. I think one taste of the crazy years is enough, don't you? Well then, what do you suggest? Lynch considered shortly and then answered. All I see is a forlorn hope. We've got to work on the board of directors and try to beat some sense into their heads. King, who had been following the discussion with a tinge, in spite of his tired despondence, interjected with a remark. Yeah, and how do you go about that? I don't know. It will take some thinking, but it seems like the most fruitful line of approach. If it doesn't work, we can always fall back on Harrington's notion of publicity. I don't insist that the world commit suicide to satisfy my criteria of an evaluation. Oh, good heavens! I forgot the time. I'm supposed to officially be at the Flagstaff Observatory. King had automatically noted the time shown by the captain's watch as it displayed. Oh, wow. It can't be that late. It isn't. Not by 2 hours. We're in a zone +7. This shows zone +5. It's radio synchronized with the master clock in Washington. Do you say radio synchronized? Yeah. Clever, huh? I call it a techronometer. It's the only one of its sort to date. My nephew designed it for me. He's bright, that boy. He'll go far. His face clouded, as if the little interlude had only served to emphasize the tragedy that hung over all of them. If any of us live that long, of course. A signal light glowed at King's desk. Stikey's face showed on the communicator's screen. King answered him, and then said, Dr. Lentz, your car is ready. You know, let Captain Harrington have it. Then, you're not going back to Chicago? No. The situation has changed. If you want me, I'm stringing along. The following Friday, Steinke ushered Lentz into King's office. King looks almost happy as he shook hands. When did you ground, Doctor? I didn't expect you to be back for another hour or so. Just now. I hired a cab instead of waiting for the shuttle. Oh, any luck? None. Same answer they gave you. The company is assured by independent experts that Destry's mechanics are valid, sees no reason to encourage any hysterical attitude among its employees. King tapped the top of his desk, his eyes unfocused, then hitching himself around to face Lentz directly. You suppose that the chairman's right? How? Could the three of us, you, me, Harrington, have gone off the deep end? Could we have slipped? No. You're sure? Certainly. Look up some independent experts of my own, now retained by the company, and had them check Harrington's work. It checks. Lentz purportedly neglected to mention that he had done so partly because he was none too sure of King's present mental stability. King sat up briskly, reached out and stabbed a push button. I'm gonna give it one more try. See if I can throw a scare into Dixon's thick head. Stikey, get me Mr. Dixon on the screen. Yes, sir. In about 2 minutes, the visiphone screen came to life and showed the features of Chairman Dixon. He was transmitting not from his office, but from the boardroom of the company in Jersey City. Yes. What is it, Superintendent? Mr. Dixon, I've called to try to impress on you the seriousness of the company's actions. I stake my scientific reputation that Harrington has proved everything completely correctly. Don't take it that way, Mr. King. I'm glad you called the board. I'm glad we're having this discussion. They have decided to accept you for retirement with full pay. It's good news, Mr. King. I did not apply for retirement. I know, Mr. King, but the board feels that I understand. Goodbye, Mr. King. Goodbye. He switched them off, turned to Lentz. With full pay, which I can enjoy in any way I like for the rest of my life. Just as happy as a man with a death house. Exactly. Well, we've tried all our ways. I suppose we should call up Harrington now. Let him try the political and public method. I suppose so. Will you be leaving Chicago for now? No, I think I'll catch the shuttle for Los Angeles, take the evening rocket to the Antipodes. King looked surprised, but said nothing. Lentz answered. Perhaps some of us on the other side of the earth will survive. I've done all I can here. I would rather be a live sheep herder in Australia than a dead psychiatrist in Chicago. Well, that shows some horse sense in you. 2 cents. I'd dump the bomb now and I'd go with you if I had half the brains. Not horse sense, my friend. A horse will run back into a burning barn, which is exactly not what I plan to do. Why don't you do it? Why don't you come along? If you did, it would help Harrington to scare him to death. I believe it will. Steiche's face appeared again on the screen. Sir, Harper and Erickson are here, Chief. I'm busy. They're pretty urgent about seeing you. All right. Show them in. Doesn't matter. They breezed in, Harper in the van. He commenced talking at once, oblivious to the superintendent's morose preoccupation. We've got it, Chief. We've got it. And it all checks out to the umpteenth decimal. You got what? Speak English. Harper grinned. He was enjoying his moment of triumph, and he was stretching it out to savor it. Chief, do you remember a few weeks back when I asked you for an additional allotment of Special One without specifying how I was going to spend it? You mean power. You mean a power source that doesn't require the bomb. The bomb? Oh no, I didn't say that. You use the bomb to make the fuel. And you use the fuel anywhere, anyhow you like, with something like 92% recovery of the energy of the bomb. You could junk the Mercury stream sequence if you wanted to. Go ahead. Tell me about it. Well, it's a matter of artificial radioactives. Just before I asked for that special research allotment, Erickson and I, Dr. Lentz, had a finger in it. Too, we found isotopes of radioactivity that seemed to be mutually antagonistic. That is, when we goosed them, the presence of each other gave up their latent energy all at once, blew it all to hell. And the important point is, we were using just a gnat's whisker of mass of each reaction, and the bomb maintained it. I don't see how that could, neither do we. Not quite, but it works. We've kept it quiet until we were sure. We checked on what we had. We found a dozen other fuels. Probably we'll be able to tailor-make fuels for any desired purpose. But here it is. He handed him the envelope. That's your copy. Look it over. King started to do so. Lentz joined them. And after a look, there was a silent request for permission, which Erickson had answered with only a verbal contribution. Sure, Doc. For a long period, there was only an occasional grunt, the clatter of turned pages, a nod of approval. At last, he put it down. It's the stuff. You've done it, boys. It's great. I'm proud of you. It's fine, Chief. We'd rather hear you say that than get the Nobel Prize. I think you'll probably get it. However, I'm not going to take any action in this matter.
Why not, Chief?
I'm being retired. My successor will take over in the near future. This is too big a matter to start just before a change in administration.
Retired? What?
About the same reason I took you off the bomb, at least. The director thinks I need to leave.
That's nonsense. You were right to take me off the bomb. I was getting jumpy. It's another matter. We all depend on you.
Thanks, Cal. That's how it is. There's nothing to be done about it. I think this is the last ironical touch needed to make the whole thing a pure farce. This thing is big. Bigger than we can guess at this stage. And I have to give it a rest.
Well, I can think of something to do about it. Either you superintend the explosion, or the company will get along without our discovery.
Erickson concurred belligerently. Wait a minute. Lentz had the floor now. Dr. Harper, have you already achieved a practical rocket fuel?
I said so.
We got it on hand right now. And it has escape speed fuel?
Sure. Why would you take any of the Clipper rockets, refit them with a trifle? Have breakfast on the moon.
Okay, very well. Bear with me. He obtained a sheet of paper from King and commenced to write. They watched in mystified impatience. He continued briskly for some minutes, hesitating only momentarily. Presently, he stopped and spun the paper over to King. Solve it, he demanded. And he accepted a pencil from Lentz and completed the solution. It required several more lines, a few more equations, before the elements canceled out or rearranged themselves into definite answers. He stared at this answer while puzzlement gave way to dawning comprehension and delight. He looked up. Erickson, Harper, we will take your new fuel, refit a large rocket, install the bomb in it, and throw it into an orbit around the Earth, far out in space. There, we will use it to make more fuel. Safe fuel for use on Earth, with the danger from the bomb itself limited to the operators actually on watch. There was no sound for a minute. It's not the sort of idea their minds were still struggling with, the complex implications.
But Chief, your retirement.
Don't worry. It's all in there. Implicit in these equations. You two, me, Lentz, the board of directors. So we all have to do to accomplish it. All except a matter of time, huh? You'll note that elapsed time appears in your answer as an undetermined unknown. Yes, of course. That's just a chance we'll have to take. Now, boys, let's get busy. Chairman Dixon called the board of directors to order. This being a special meeting, we'll dispense with minutes and reports. As set forth in the call, we have agreed to give the retiring superintendent 3 hours of our time. In view of Superintendent King's long and distinguished service, he asks a hearing, we honor it. We're bound to grant it. You have the floor, Dr. King. King got up, stated briefly, Dr. Lentz will speak for me. He sat down. Lentz had to wait till coughing. His throat was clearing. Lentz ran quickly over the main points in the argument, which contended that the bomb presented an intolerable danger anywhere on the face of the Earth. And he moved at once to the alternative proposal that the bomb should be located in a rocket ship, an artificial, moonlit flying in a free orbit around the Earth at a convenient distance, say 15,000 miles secondary power stations on Earth, burning on safe fuel manufactured by the bomb itself. He announced the discovery of the Harper-Erickson technique and dwelt on it, which meant them commercially.
Each point was presented as persuasively as possible, with full points of his engaging personality. Then he paused and waited for them to blow off steam. Lentz patiently and politely dealt with their objections. He emphasized the increasing incidences of occupational psychoneurosis among the engineers and the grave danger to everyone near the bomb. Then he changed his tone and let them have it directly, brutally. Gentlemen, we believe that we are fighting for our lives, our own lives, our families, and every life on this globe. If you refuse this compromise, we will fight as fiercely and with as little regard for fair play as any concerned animal. With that, he made his move to attack. But its object was to stir up fear of the bomb, and to direct the fear not into panic, but into rage against the board of directors personally, and into a demand that the government take action to have the bomb removed to outer space. That's blackmail, sir. We will stop you. I think not. You may be able to keep us out of some of the newspapers, but you can't stop the rest of it. You can't even keep us off the air. Ask the Federal Communications Commission. It was true. Harrington had handled the political end and had performed his assignment well. The president himself was convinced. Dr. Lentz, you plan to make every one of us appear black-hearted scoundrel. No other thought than personal profit, even at the expense of the lives of others. And you know that that is not true. This is simply a difference of opinion as to what is wise to do. I didn't say it was true. But you will admit that I can convince the public that you are deliberate villains. As to it being a difference of opinion, you're none of your atomic physicists. You're not entitled to hold opinions in this matter. And as a matter of fact, the only doubt in my mind is whether or not an enraged public will destroy your precious power plant before Congress has time to exercise eminent domain and take it away from you. Before they had time to think up arguments and answers and ways of circumventing him, before their hot indignation had cooled instead of stubborn resistance, he offered his gambit. He produced another layout for a propaganda campaign of an entirely different sort. This time the board of directors was to be built up, not torn down. All the same techniques were to be used. Behind-the-scenes features articles with plenty of human interest would describe the functions of the company, describe it as a public trust, administered by patriotic, unselfish statesmen of the business world. And as the proper point of the campaign, Harper Erickson Fuel would be announced, not as a semi-accidental result of the initiative of 2 employees, but as the long-expected and end product of years of systematic research conducted under a fixed policy growing naturally out of their humane determination to remove forever the menace of explosion from even the sparsely settled Arizona desert. No mention was to be made of the danger of complete planet-embracing catastrophe. Lent discussed it. He dwelt on the appreciation that was due from them, from a grateful world, and he invited them to make a noble sacrifice. Subtle misdirection. He tempted them to make themselves as heroes, and he deliberately played on one of the most deep-rooted simian instincts, the desire for approval from one's kind, deserved or not. And all the while he was playing for time. And he directed his attention from one hard case, one resistant mind to another. He soothed and he tickled and he played on personal foibles for the benefit of the timorous and the devoted family men. He again painted a picture of the suffering, death, destruction that might result from their well-meant reliance on the unproved and highly questionable predictions of Destry's mathematics. Then, he described in glowing detail a picture of a world free from worry, but granted almost unlimited power, safe power, from an intervention which was theirs, for this was one small concession. And it worked. They didn't reverse themselves, but a committee was appointed to investigate the feasibility of the proposed spaceship power plant. By sheer brass, Lynn suggested names for the committee, and Dixon confirmed his nomination, not because he wished to particularly, but because he was caught off guard, could not think of a reason to refuse without affronting the colleagues. The impending retirement of King was not mentioned by either side. Privately, Lentz felt sure that it would never be mentioned. It worked. There was much left to do. For the first few days after the victory in committee, King felt much elated by the prospect of an early release from the soul-killing worry. He was buoyed by that pleasant demand of Manifold's new administrative tasks. Harper and Erickson were detached to Goddard Field to collaborate with the rocket engineers. A schedule had to be worked out with the business office to permit as much power of the bomb as possible to be diverted to make atomic fuel. And a gigantic combustion chamber for atomic fuel had to be designed and ordered to replace the bomb itself during the interim between the time it was shut down on Earth and the later time when sufficient local smaller plants could be built to carry the commercial load. He was busy. When the first activity had died down and they were settled in a new routine, pending the shuttle down from the bomb and its removal to outer space, King suffered an emotional reaction. There was by then nothing to do but wait, tend to the bomb, until the crew at Goddard Field smoothed out the bugs and produced a space-worthy rocket ship. They ran into difficulties, overcame them, came across more difficulties. They had never used such high reaction velocities. It took many trials to find a nozzle shape that would give reasonably high efficiency. When that was solved and success seemed in sight, the jets burned out on time trial ground test. They were stalemated for weeks over that hitch. Back at the power plant, Superintendent King could not do anything. The bomb, lest it heartbreakingly blow up at the last minute. He took to hanging around in the control room. He had to stop that. His unease communicated itself in his watch of engineers. 2 of them crapped up in a single day, 1 of them on watch. He must face the fact there had been a grave upswing in the psychoneurosis among his engineers since the period of watchful waiting had commenced. At first, they had tried to keep the essential facts of the plan as close to a secret, but it had leaked out, perhaps through some member of the investigating committee. He admitted to himself now that it had been a mistake ever to try and keep Lentz advised against it, and the engineers not actually engaged in the changeover were now bound to know something was up. He took all the engineers into confidence at last, under oath of secrecy. That had helped for a week or more, at which they were all given a spiritual lift by their knowledge. Then it had worn off, the reaction had set in, and psychological observers had started disqualifying engineers for duty almost daily. They were even resorting to each other as mentally unstable with great frequency. He might even be faced with a shortage of psychiatrists if it kept up. He thought to himself with bitter amusement. His engineers were already standing 4 hours in every 16. If one dropped out, he put himself on watch. That would be a relief to tell himself the truth. Somehow, some of the civilians around about and the non-technical employees were catching up on the secret. It mustn't go on. If it spread any farther, there might be a nationwide panic. But how could he stop it? He couldn't. He turned over in bed, rearranged his pillow, tried once more to get to sleep. No soap. His head ached. His eyes were balls of pain, and his brain was ceaseless grind of useless repetitive activities, like a disc recording stuck in one groove. It was unbearable. He sat up, switched on the bed lamp, looked at his clock. 3:30. Not so good. He got up, went into the bathroom, and dissolved the sleeping powder in a glass of whiskey and water, half and half. Gulped it down, went back to bed. Presently, he dozed off. And it was thus, after a day's work, that King found himself bolted in very few minutes later. "Harper! What's happened?" Harper took hold of him briefly. He nodded. "I saw the tail end of the fight from Officer Steinke." He seemed to grasp for the first time who was on the trigger. "You're telling me We have someone flying that ship who can't manage the controls. Psychoneurosis. He hurried toward him. King looked bewildered, then nodded vaguely. Let him be. He turned back to Harper. How does it happen you're here? He pointed to the door, where Green's solid form partially hid Lint's. Wait a minute. You say that everything is ready to install the bomb in the ship? You're sure? Positive. The big ship's already flown with our fuel faster than she will have to fly to reach station in her orbit. I was in it, remember? Out in space, Chief. We're all set. 6 ways from zero. King stared at the dumping switch, mounted behind the glass at the top of the instrument board. What do you mean? There's not enough fuel, he said softly. I thought there'd been fuel enough for weeks. And he walked swiftly over the switch, smashed the glass with his fist and pulled it. The room rumbled and shivered as 2.5 molten tons, massive metal, heavier than gold, coursed down channels, struck against baffles, split into a dozen streams, and plunged to rest, and led in receivers to rest, safe and harmless, until it could be reassembled. And the bomb would be reassembled far out in space.